Iain Paterson, thank you for being here with us. Welcome to Colombia and to Teatro Mayor Julio y Santo Domingo. Let's begin talking about your career and how you became a bass baritone.
I started singing at music college when I was 18 years old. I applied to be a violinist with my voice as a second study, and they offered me a place as a singer, not a violinist. And I always tell people that's the worst critique I ever had. And from then on, I spent the first 10 years of my career singing as a bass, singing things like Sparfucile in Rigoletto and Ferrando in Trovatore, L'Ozio Bonzo in Madama Butterfly, things like that, Collina in La Boheme. I did lots of Italian repertoire. I did lots of Mozart, Leporello, Figaro. And then in my early 30s, after about 10 years as a bass, I started to discover that I could sing higher notes. So I took on some more baritonal roles like Amonasro in Aida, Don Giovanni. And then sort of in my mid-30s, about 5 years after that, I found my voice started settling somewhere in the middle of baritone and bass. So that's why I'm a bass baritone. So now I sing primarily German repertoire, Strauss and Wagner, but I still like to sing Mozart whenever I can.
Iain, let's talk about performances you've done in the most important and biggest theaters in the world.
I've sung in some really nice places, yeah. I always used to joke with myself that, if I would consider myself as a successful singer if I got to sing at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And I was lucky enough to be invited there a few years ago to do the Ring cycle, to sing Gunther in Götterdämmerung. And then they invited me back when they did their new production. So I'm very, very lucky to be one of only a few people who's sung two productions of the Ring cycle at the Metropolitan Opera. And I had one of those wonderful years that you dream about as a singer, where you sing in all the big opera houses of the world. I was very, very lucky because I sang Fasold, one of the giants in Das Rheingold, and I sang Gunther in Götterdämmerung. And at the time, it was the double centenary, the 200th anniversary of Wagner, and everybody who could afford to do it was putting on a production of the Ring cycle. So I got to sing in lots of places that I'd never been able to sing in before. I got to sing in Berlin, I got to sing in Munich, I got to sing in La Scala Milan. But it was just luck more than anything that I happened to be singing the right repertoire at the right time. So I would love to say it was all down to me, but there was an element of luck in there as well.
That's great, yeah. Now let's talk about Salomé, this opera, and why is it one of the most important operas of Richard Strauss, and why is he one of the greatest composers of his time?
Strauss himself came along after Richard Wagner, and Richard Wagner had created these amazing, he called them sort of sacred festival stage plays, I guess is a good translation. And he didn't see them so much as operas, he saw them as Gesamtkunstwerke, so complete works of art, incorporating poetry and art and scenery and dance, and everything was in there, complete art form. And Strauss in many ways is kind of an anti-Wagner, I think anyway, in that his orchestrations are, although the orchestras are just as big and sometimes even bigger than Wagner, they're much more experimental. So, in Wagner you will have big blocks of sound and beautiful long solos, but with Strauss you'll have little bursts of everything, like little flashes of colour. So Strauss should be far more delicate in performance, even though you can have 108 players in the orchestra pit. He was a fabulous, fabulous orchestrator, and he orchestrated in a way that hadn't been done before. He was experimenting with sound, and he was one of the first composers really to experiment with atonality as well. You really hear that in Salomé. Salomé was his third opera, and his most experimental work. And I don't think although he continued writing, many fantastic operas, none of them were as radical and as shockingly new musically at the time they were composed as Salomé was, which is kind of fitting, of course, because the stage play by Oscar Wilde caused a huge sensation in Paris, a big scandal when it premiered. So it's sort of fitting that Salomé pushes back the barriers. And even today, I was saying to somebody the other day, even today, we see these ISIS beheadings. The idea of beheading another human being is something that hasn't lost its capacity to strike horror and fear into people. Even 100 years later, it's still something horrible and inconceivable to most people, unthinkable. So it's still got that power to shock. And I think it's a tremendously exciting thing to do in Colombia for the first time. I can't believe that the Colombian people haven't had a chance to see this opera live on stage yet. I think they're going to really enjoy it.
That's right, Iain. That's why people cannot miss this opera. Now let's talk about your character you're playing in Salomé, and what's the most difficult thing about performing your character in Salomé?
The most difficult thing about performing Johann, as he is in Germany, we say John the Baptist in English. And what do you say? Is it Juan Bautista?
Yes, that's right. In Spanish as well.
Yeah. Well, in the time that Richard Strauss composed Salomé, the idea in the story is that there's a system, there's a dungeon, a room below Herod's palace where John the Baptist is imprisoned. And you hear him before you see him in the opera. You hear this voice soaring up from the depths. But of course, when Strauss composed this, electronic amplification didn't exist. There was no microphones, there was nothing. So he composed it in such a way that all the phrases are set really, really high and loud in the voice. So it's a bit like if I were a tenor, I would be singing almost every phrase with a top C or a top B flat, to put that into context that people would understand. For a bass, that's about an F sharp, and pretty much every phrase he sings has a sustained high note in it, just so that the audience have a chance of hearing him when he's singing not on the stage. Nowadays, it's normal that people, put him away somewhere in a corner and put a microphone in front of him and then put it through speakers. But we're not doing that here. We're doing it the way Richard Strauss intended it to be. So there's no amplification. We found a space in the stage left wing where I can stand, and you hear, well, I don't have the microphone and that'll pick it up, but something like this in here, you get a big echo. So it sounds as if I'm down in a cavern underneath the palace. It's really exciting, it's good, but it's hard work, it's very hard to sing.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Talking about that, how are the rehearsals going with Maestro Caballé and Maestro Recci?
Fantastic. Johann Anton Recci, I turned up for the first rehearsal and we looked at one another. I know you, and I know you as well. And it turned out that 12 years ago we did Don Giovanni in London, directed by Callisto Bieto, and I was understudying Leporello, and Recci was assisting Callisto. So we've actually worked together. And Merced as well, the costume designer, she worked on that show as well. So it was really nice realising that we'd all worked together before. Josep Caballé, our conductor, I hadn't worked with him before, and he's doing a fantastic job. It's a very, very difficult score for a conductor because, as I said earlier, the music is very experimental. So the key changes, the time signatures change, you know, the harmonies change, everything changes quickly. Salomé speaks in one musical language, Juan Bautista speaks in a completely different musical language. So whenever there's a conversation between them, it changes like this all the time. And the orchestra, of course, they've never played this piece before. And I have been really, really impressed by both Josep and the orchestral players as well, at how quickly they're learning this piece. You know, the difference between the first rehearsal that we had with them, which was only 2 days ago, and now is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. They play it really, really well, and they're getting better all the time. And I don't know, it feels a little bit like they were born to be playing this music, and I hope they're going to do more of it. I hope they're going to do more Strauss here in Colombia.
Well, that's great. We'll see the result in Salomé next week. Iain, why must Colombian people come and see Salomé, taking into account that it's the first time that this opera is being performed in Colombia?
Well, I think you've just said it. That's, you know, to say that you were there, because it will definitely be performed again and again and again. But to be there, to be one of the first to see it, I mean, to me, it's really exciting that to do a national premiere of a piece. I mean, Strauss has been dead for so long, and this piece was composed over 100 years ago, and yet here we're doing a premiere of this famous piece of music. So I think it's not something you get a chance to experience very often. But whenever people ask me, you know, why should you go and do something, why should you do this? I always tell a story about, I was offered 2 tickets when I was a student to go and see Queen live at Knebworth, and I turned the tickets down because I thought, you know, it's Queen, I'll go and see them another time, and I never got another chance to see them, and I always regret it. So, you know, I always say, if there's something exciting, just go and do it and experience it. You don't want to be sitting around like me years later going, why didn't I go?
That's a great example, yeah. Really great example. I'm sorry for that.
No, it's my own stupidity.
Okay, and thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And best wishes in your performances in Salomé.
Thank you very much.